Okay. A hearty welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Who's jet-lagged?
Me.
Emma Tucker, Almar Latour. Oops, wait a minute. This is low technology here. Nice. Oh, there it is. One of them is the editor, the other one is the CEO of a Wall Street Journal, which I think, in my book, is one of the very best papers in the world, but I'm biased. I read the damn thing first thing every morning, and I even wrote for the editorial page, which was a pleasure, except for the last 20 years, the fees haven't gone up.
Oh dear.
Are you listening?
Oh, I'm happy to charge you more. If you
No, I was being paid.
Oh,
Not
those fees.
Yeah. You got it.
Well, I think I agree with that, but let's see how the audience responds.
Okay, so now to weightier things. Your correspondent, Evan Gershkovich, has been imprisoned in Moscow for 10 months now. He has been Putin's prisoner, essentially. And the trumped-up charge is espionage. How is he holding up in these 10 months? I understand he has been reading Tolstoy's War and Peace, 1,400 pages and several hundred names. What else is he doing to keep the faith in Lefortovo prison, which is not exactly a spa?
No, it certainly isn't. And thank you very much, Josef. So we don't have much communication. In fact, we have no communication with Evan other than via letters. So one thing I know he's doing is writing a lot of letters, because he has received letters from everybody in the newsroom and from all over the world. So the only communication we have with him is via letters, which are obviously censored on their way in and on their way out. But we also, the lifeline for Evan has been his very courageous Russian lawyers who get in to see him. I think it's once a fortnight they have an hour with him. And that's an important lifeline for him, and obviously it is for us. He hasn't been able to see his parents since a court appearance a few months ago. Since then, they haven't been able to go back to Moscow. And even when he did see them, it was through one of those horrible glass cages. So, but as far as we know, he's holding up well. He's a strong...
He's not well?
No, he is well. He's holding up well. He's a strong young man. He knew the risks of what he was doing. He'd even proposed a piece before he was captured about this business of Russians taking hold of Westerners and imprisoning them. So I think insofar as anyone can survive an ordeal like this, Evan is the person.
If we want to write to him, what's the zip code for Lefortovo prison?
I'll have to Google that.
Now, a bit more delicate question, if I may. What is the United States doing to get him out, apart from making very tough statements from Joe Biden down?
Yeah. Well, the U.S. administration has first overtly been very supportive.
Yeah.
The president has spoken out, of course, in support of Evan, has met with the parents, and while that's words, that's still incredibly important, right? Creating an atmosphere that there is overt support from the U.S. government. Then behind the scenes, there's a lot going on. Some statements have been made officially by Jake Sullivan, who works at the White House, focuses on national security. That there are proposals being made to the Russians. Yep. Russians have responded, and this is public information, have responded negatively to the proposals so far. Vladimir Putin has at a press conference said that they are interested in a deal, but it has to be also on their terms. But the U.S. government has been tremendously supportive. Since the Trump administration, there has been a special agency devoted to hostage affairs, and they sort of are the engine room in dealing with issues like this. And very unfortunate that this agency is getting busier and busier. There's Evan, but there's just many more hostages piling up again and again. Just in the past few weeks, there's another American was arrested on drug charges in Moscow. Another journalist was arrested just 2 months ago. And so this problem is only getting bigger.
So Putin has turned hostages into a thriving business.
Yes.
And why don't we do the same? Why don't we take their guys?
Well,
I know what the answer is, but
I think it's really important to recognize that, this is not sort of rogue terrorists or sort of pirates anymore. This is deliberate state-ordered taking of Westerners to use as a trading tool. It's very, very deliberate, and it's, as Almar said, it's increasing, which represents a huge challenge, not just to news organizations, but also to corporations. So, very few people want to. I mean, we don't have anybody now on the ground in Russia other than Evan himself, and he's, behind bars. But we don't send. We think. I know that businesses, for example, are thinking much more carefully about who they send to China, where they put their people, because this rogue activity by governments is definitely on the increase.
yes, but what can we? In my business, international politics, it's tit for tat.
Yeah.
You do for me, I'll do for you. You again, I'll do. There is nothing we can do, can we? Because we cannot take foreign journalists hostage in the United States.
Yeah, right? First, I want to just at least fight your premise a little bit.
Right,
I'm not sure that it's a thriving business, right? It's one tool that comes straight out of the dictator's playbook, but it has a lot of negative consequences ultimately on the international stage.
Correct.
Wherever Vladimir Putin shows up, wherever Russian officials show up, there are protests, there are people reminding them of the situation. Now, they may relish that at this point. It might play to the domestic market, but I would not characterize it as a thriving business. Then, obviously, the moral question: we cannot do what they do because we are us and we have our values, and of course, we cannot stoop that low.
So we are at a disadvantage, correct?
Well, it's an asymmetric battle in this case, right? A morally asymmetric battle.
Same thing, more elegantly put. Okay.
We're at a disadvantage, but it's not as if there aren't arrests being made of Russian spies. The West is crawling with interference from Russia.
You just gave me a hint what to do. Last summer I wrote that Evan will eventually be set free. Do you have any idea when eventually might be?
They have the playbook, such as it is, but again, this is only going on what's happened in the past, is they're unlikely to release him or to do any sort of swap until he's been tried. Because if they release him before he's tried, then they can argue that, they can then, it looks, the US argument that he was wrongfully detained looks valid. So it's likely to be that they will charge him, try him, and only then, after a trial where they find him guilty, will they be able to do some sort of swap, or will they be willing to do some sort of swap? Now, we have no insight on this. This is simply what has happened with other similar cases.
Okay. But, a more general point, I think this is not just about Evan, but also what in Russian we call provokatia, a nasty, brutal challenge to the United States. So with Evan as a pawn in a great power game. What is Putin's game? Do you have any ideas?
I wish we knew.
Well,
I mean, it's leverage. It's
leverage.
Pure and simple leverage.
To get what?
Well, there are all sorts of theories around as to exactly what it is he wants. I mean, if you look at, there are various names come up as to people that they're interested in getting back. But it's very difficult to know. I mean, no one really knows what Putin wants.
Well, the first order of business was actually to try and find out what do the Russians want in return. and that's what the administration, the U.S. administration, has been focused on. There are some recent precedents, not perfectly analogous, but there was a famous U.S. Female basketball player, Brittany Griner, that people here will know, who was arrested on minor drug charges, got an excessive punishment for that, had to write, I believe, a letter of apology after her conviction, and was traded for Victor Bout, the worst arms dealer that the world has seen. And so that gives you a trading value, basketball player, worst weapons trader in the world. And so you project that forward, then you can have an idea of what Putin's game might be in this narrow sense.
Okay, I understand. Now to Russia as such, in the old days, in the good old days, the Brezhnev regime merely expelled foreign journalists, and that was it. And, under Putin, since he came into power, has successively sharpened the law, tightened the noose. So just a couple of examples. If the Kremlin decides this is fake, you can get 15 years in prison for this. Even if you report official data, whatever the statistics are worth. So Putin has liquidated the last remnants of a free press in Russia. Now I admit, hard question. Why would we send foreign correspondents into prison land?
Into
prison land, into
right.
countries like Russia where there is no rule of law.
Well,
why?
Well, I think if it was so, the decisions that we have to make every day are our commitment to covering the news from the ground is a commitment we will never ever step away from. However, we are never ever going to send journalists into situations where the risk outweighs the reward. And these are the kind of conversations that we're having all the time, and I'm very sorry to say we're having them more frequently, more often, and they're more distressing than they used to be. So after Evan was arrested, most news agencies and big news providers, with a few exceptions, pulled everybody out of Moscow.
That's
because
right.
Why would you leave your journalists there at risk of them ending up in prison? And look, this other poor woman is now in a similar situation. But it's that we're making these calculations around a lot of countries. We sometimes have to check in on how safe it is for our journalists to operate in China. We certainly don't send anybody to North Korea. And the problem is the network of countries that are deemed
shrinking.
Dangerous. Yeah, exactly.
When I sent people into the field, I told them one thing: don't argue with machine guns.
Yeah, quite.
Josef, though, it's important to point out that when you talk about the tightening noose of Russian law, that Evan was there as an accredited journalist. We were entirely within the realm of their legal framework. And so he was invited, he was welcomed, and then there was this about face, right? And so even when there is a quote-unquote clear set of rules, that can change suddenly. So this definitely has a dampening impact on the ability to do reporting. Emma and her team, though, and even in countries like China, you can do a lot from the periphery as well.
We're getting very good at reporting on countries from outside those countries.
Apart from what I just said, don't argue with machine guns. When you go into a revolutionary situation in a war, you don't want to argue with machine guns. But how else should we instruct them before we send them off to Beijing or Riyadh or Moscow? What's our responsibility to them?
Well,
we tell them, be cautious.
Well, we always say don't do anything that puts the minute you think your life or your liberty is at risk. Don't do it. We're absolutely clear. safety first. The safety of the journalists is
Safety first.
absolutely our priority. And it's sometimes we have to overrule the journalists because you know what they're like.
I know what they're like, especially
get out-
especially when they're young and unmarried.
When they're young and somewhat inexperienced, with the situation that happened in the Middle East, you get a bunch of journalists, they're high on adrenaline, this story is exciting, but our job from the safety of where we're sitting is to assess the risks and to sometimes overrule them. But we're very, very good about preparing journalists now. There's a whole kind of almost industry around, training, making sure they've all done these, sort of sessions with former military people so they know what to look out for, they know what the danger signals are.
Yeah, it's very interesting what you just said. We never trained our guys that way.
Now they're very much trained, and we have a whole security team in Ukraine, for example, which we then moved over to Israel recently. Yeah. They're there just to enable us to keep publishing.
So
they're
special journalistic forces, right?
Yes.
Well, this is incredibly important. Investing in a security apparatus and a sort of a minor, even intelligence apparatus for a newsroom that can afford it is no luxury, right? So we have an advance guard going out before any reporters go into the field, sort of in a war situation, so that there is an understanding. Here's where the risks are. Here's where the exit routes are if something goes wrong, and so. Even in Evan's case, it's not as if he was just feeling his way around in the dark on his own. The Wall Street Journal and Dow Jones have a very strict security protocol and a security apparatus that surrounds these reporters at all times.
This is very, very interesting and very important. In my days, we just got shot at. Or we respected quarantine and stayed in the hotel. Like in Tehran. I just learned something, thank you. Let me widen the lens a little bit. Reporters Without Borders recently published a report. I'm going to read off the numbers here. A very depressing tally. In 73 countries, media freedom is either totally or seriously constrained, unquote. In another 60, it is, quote, limited, unquote. How can we protect our correspondents outside the free world? What you just said, is that the only thing we can do?
Yeah, I think it's a real...
Is there anything politically we can do?
Well, we can talk about the importance of a free press, but frankly, that's not an argument that resonates in many of these countries. In fact, quite the opposite. At our end, we can talk about it, but it's a real challenge for news organizations because, as Almar was describing, it's not cheap. It's protecting your journalists, and that means that it's often the big legacy brands that are the only ones that can afford to have, this sort of security apparatus, to provide the kind of levels of risk assessment that are so important in these cases, and that's a challenge for all of us. You're right. The old days where a freelance would just rock up at a war zone and cover it. I mean, they might do that now, but no one's going to insure them. No one's going to provide them with the safety.
Just an example. One of our guys who went to Iraq came back and put in his expenses, and there were 2 items, 2 Kalashnikov rifles for personal security, $500 each. I didn't quite believe it, but I let it go.
There is a value, though, to keeping the spotlight on situations like these and many others. Yeah. And there is something that you might call the embarrassment factor. Yeah. So
for the bad guys?
For the bad guys. And that might play at the UN or in other sort of international institutions where they want to be seen as players and having a seat at the table. And when they are reminded, it might have some corrosive impact on their intentions.
So shame him.
Shaming them for bad behavior is something that we are certainly trying to do, and I think it's not the weapon that will determine the outcome, but it is definitely one of the tools in our arsenal.
So what you just said, if a little follow, legacy papers which have the money and the resources have to behave like states? think in terms of security, global diplomacy. You need a team of guys like me, international politics specialists.
Is this a job pitch? No, we do. We do. And again, but it's a challenge. Providing quality, trusted journalism is a very, very expensive business.
Yes.
And we're all, as the media landscape fractures, it's becoming much harder for publishers to make money, frankly. How do you make money out of news? Now, Dow Jones is a very successful company, and we are lucky that we're very, we still make money. But I think a challenge for all of us and for democracy is the fact that providing quality, trusted, balanced eyewitness reports from the ground to produce journalism that people can have faith in is becoming a very difficult and expensive business. And that's a wider challenge for the world than it is just for news
That means we're going to have to pay more per Wall Street Journal copy than ever before, right?
Well, we are already very expensive.
I know.
I'm sorry, we're not. We're not that expensive. We're cheaper in Europe than in the US. But it's a challenge for all of us.
So I think I see threatening body language there. Back to the old days. In the old days, in Stalin's days even, American journalists in Moscow sprinkled their dispatches with American slang to fool the censors. Is there anything like it today?
Oh, we don't use slang at the Wall Street Journal. If there is, I've missed it.
Okay.
Yes, maybe euphemisms.
All right. Let me, at the end, talk more generally about our profession. So, as I flattered you earlier, the Wall Street Journal is one of the very best in the world. And so how does a publication like you deal with the headwinds that are slicing into our market? When Gen Z reads less and less, when newspapers are dying, and when a myriad websites compete with you with fake and falsehood and manipulation. What's the antidote?
Well, first off, we have more subscribers than ever before in our history.
How many you got? About 4 now?
We have in excess of for all of Dow Jones, 5.6 million subscribers.
Still less than the Times.
And it is growing. Well, that's if you count cooking apps.
Yeah,
If you look at the fear index, at the VIX, for example,
Yeah.
and you see big dramatic things happening on the global stage, you see a peak.
Yeah.
With every peak, people need trusted information, and they come to the Wall Street Journal, but also other quality publications. And so investing in high quality journalism pays off.
So this is very interesting. Let me repeat this. If you get in a peak and fake and manipulation, all of that, that actually triggers readers to go to respectable outfits? Can you measure that?
Yes, we definitely measured it with subscriptions.
Yeah, we find that when there's a really big earth-shattering or world-shattering event, people revert to the trusted sources. So we get huge volumes of people coming to us when there's a big event. We're lucky that there has been so much big news. The war in Ukraine, everything that happened in the Middle East. These big news events bring audiences to us.
So, bad news is good news.
Well, not always. Our challenge is to find how we keep the people who come to us in between these big news events. And, because we can't rely on it, we need to be bringing people in, new audiences, like you said, younger people who didn't grow up reading newspapers, whose parents didn't now even grow up reading newspapers. We have to be where they are and make sure that when they come to us, they're getting something of value that keeps them engaged. But it's not easy.
It's a nice end to our 000 to our session, but it's still given jet lag, especially Emma, This was a stellar performance, fast-paced, full of information, very low bullshit quotient.
Zero bullshit.
Zero bullshit quotient. So I just want to end on this note. Without freedom of the press, there is no freedom, period. And I hope, by the way, we haven't talked about our governments, your European governments. I hope that European governments are giving the US all the help they can get for very egotistical reasons. I mean, it could happen to our guys too.
Yeah. Actually, I just wanted to say as well, the German media has been very supportive.
Yeah.
The media generally have been very supportive. But everyone, talk about Evan, read about him, tell everyone you meet about Evan. Almar's completely right. The one tool we have is embarrassment, and we need to keep his story in people's minds, front and center. Inevitably, the story drifts off the front pages because he's now been in prison for nearly a year now, but it's very, very important for people to keep talking about him, and we're all hugely grateful to all the support we've had globally.
Amen, amen, amen. Now, my last words here. Thank you, both of you, especially considering that one of you is jet-lagged. And thank the audience. I've seen the numbers have grown and they've listened very attentively. Thank you for listening. And one last thing I want to tell all of you, keep renewing your newspaper subscriptions. Thank you.